Elevator Systems, Bowen Family Systems Theory in brief for a life of learning. Welcome to Elevator Systems, the podcast that looks at ideas from Bowen Family Systems Theory in brief and understandable ways. We recently finished our fourth season where we looked at the mild, medium, and hot topics that bring spice to our relationships and how Bowen Theory can be a resource when differences arise. And I think the season was really ultimately about beliefs and how we manage different beliefs and perspectives in our relationships. So Katie and I thought it would be a great way to round out the season by having an episode just about beliefs from a Bowen Theory perspective. And joining the conversation is Dr. Anne McKnight. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you so much.
Anne is a longtime student of Bowen Theory and has worked as a clinician using the theory in her practice for 40 years. She is a Director Emerita of the Bowen Center, which she led from 2010 to 2020. She's the author of Thinking Systems, Applying Bowen Theory in Clinical Practice, which Katie and I can speak for Katie, we both recommend, and has presented nationally and internationally on Bowen Theory. But most importantly, it has been useful in her own life with her family, 3 children and 9 grandchildren, which is what it's all about. You get the first pitch, Anne, about Bowen Theory and beliefs.
Well, beliefs are an important foundation for directing one's life. And if one works on differentiation, part of the task is sorting through and defining your beliefs. But one of the things that I was thinking about what I want to talk about today about beliefs. And I think there are many people who have very strong beliefs that may or may not be connected to facts. And that's part of what we're facing in the world today. You know, that fake news or fact-checking, all of this is part of what we meet socially in our different countries. I'm in the United States, you're in Canada, but I think we all face this. And so what does it mean to have a mature belief? And that's what I was thinking about, I wanted to talk about today.
Very good.
There we go. So I think that I hope we spend some time talking about that. Do you want to define a mature belief now, Anne, or do you want to hear the other pitches?
Well, this is what I was thinking about, and then we can go on and talk about whatever you have on your agenda. I was thinking about my own life and how I had certain beliefs. You know, I grew up in the 70s, and it was a very volatile time, you know, and we as students had all kinds of beliefs about what should happen in society and what should happen with the government. And it's not that I have changed my basic overall beliefs. What I think I've changed is how I would live them in a different way today, looking back. So I think that has something to do with maturity. And you know, that's another word for differentiation in Bowen Theory. I think, okay, this is my final thought about it. I think that beliefs are a stepping stone to working to define self. But I think as you do that, defining self or working on differentiation can affect the way you define your beliefs. You know, that it's an intersection between the two. This is what I found as people in my clinical practice work on differentiation. They're clear about what is a thoughtful and mature belief. I mean, what do they want their life to stand for? And I think that's different than, well, I believe this government is rotten. I believe this government is without fault. That there's how people can get emotionally charged in their beliefs.
Yeah. I think that's a good segue to my pitch. Because I think this whole season has been, I think I've named this on various episodes, has been heavy lifting for me, in the sense of I did feel like at each episode of these topics, I was thinking through, what do I think about this? Where am I clear? Where am I less clear? How does that view change when I interact with different people? So I'm happy that we're having this conversation today. And I wrote down already so many things to think more about with Anne's comment that's there. But my quick pitch is, when I thought about this, I said, facing challenge is where the cracks are observed in my own beliefs. So for me, it highlights the importance of slowing down to get clear about what I believe. And I think what I observed this season is sometimes I don't know where I'm not clear until I'm faced with a challenge. And I wanted to add with Bowen Theory, in a relationship system. So I think there's one way to be clear for self, but when you're faced within the context of a relationship system, family or otherwise, I think that's where I observe myself on a good day, if I'm being pretty observant of where am I clear or less clear, or when can I notice I'm falling to the pressures of the group, or when I'm able to stand on my own thinking in the face of others who might have different beliefs. So that's what I just want to think more about this, because I do think that Bowen Theory does provide a good way of thinking through belief systems that people have. Dixie, what have you got?
Mine is a little different. I hope it's clear, because my pitch is brought to you by the letter B. And I thought this was very clever, but it might not be as understandable. Bowen Theory offers a big picture on beliefs, the beginning of beliefs, the bending of beliefs, how we believe things because of our buddies, the backlash one can brace for when you believe differently, the brawn to not bend when badgered or bullied, and the bravery to neither bottle up one's beliefs nor broadcast with bravado.
It was like an elocution lesson.
I couldn't find the word for define. How does one define that started with the letter B? Because I think that's really what it's all about. But so that was my clever-ish pitch. And then a few other pitches. When I was looking through family therapy and clinical practice for a quote, it was, people can go and review chapter 9 again, because in the scale of differentiation, Dr. Bowen sort of looks at how beliefs are lived out at each level of the scale, which I think is interesting. But here's a quote from Dr. Bowen. 2 levels of self have been postulated. One is solid self, made up of firmly held convictions and beliefs. It is formed slowly and can be changed from within self, but it is never changed by coercion or persuasion by others. The other level of self is the pseudo-self, made up of knowledge incorporated by the intellect and of principles and beliefs acquired from others. The pseudo-self is acquired from others and is negotiable in relationship with others. It can be changed by emotional pressure to enhance one's image with others or to oppose the other. And then I've really enjoyed Robert Williamson. He wrote a number of articles on beliefs for the Journal and for Family Systems Forum. And then this little book, Family Thoughts, has all of them in book form. And he says, conventional thinking most often explains changes in relationships as having been caused or made necessary by changes in beliefs. I think that most often something like the opposite is closer to the truth. When lasting changes in relationships and changes in beliefs happen around the same time, those beliefs are more likely to be functioning primarily to support the new relationship postures. And then one more quote from Victoria Harrison. She did an article all about the belief paper assignment for the Family Systems Forum. And she says, if being the most responsible person possible is important, well-defined beliefs and principles require action. Defining basic beliefs and principles makes it all the more obvious when one is not putting them into practice. So, whole bunch of ideas. What do you notice?
Well, I mean, I've always gone back and forth about pseudo self and solid self. I mean, I think, part of emerging beliefs has to do with taking from one's environment what makes sense.
Hmm.
And you can say,
Mhm.
well, how do you navigate life through beliefs that then can incorporate outside information? This idea that beliefs are just like the Ten Commandments and cast in stone, I don't really think works for me.
Hmm.
I think that part of a belief system has to do with thinking maturely, and that beliefs can emerge from that about how one wants to navigate life.
Mhm.
Um, but I think they can evolve over time. It's not a stasis, like you have your beliefs and you're going to make it through life. I mean, when is it a lack of maturity to not see another point of view?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I was just think I hope they do. I mean, I would hope for myself and my child and others that we do not stay stagnant with our beliefs. One reason that I always said would make me sad is it to me would mean that you don't continue to learn and experience life, because I think that we have to put the filter of our experiences on those belief systems. I mean, to think through that. So my hope is that it is a process, or a journey, a thinking through a regular review, rather than a place where you get to and you stop.
The other thing, I mean, I think that part of the context of, I mean, I was in the class with Dr. Bowen when he asked us
Mhm.
for a belief paper, and I never did very well at that. But so people would come up with, well, I believe in God. I believe in the Torah. I believe in,
Mm.
various things. And he says, that's not what I'm talking about. I think what he was talking about was what you believe about how you want to manage yourself in the relationship system
Yeah.
that you are a part of. A belief, for instance, I don't want to take responsibility for something in my family that really belongs to someone else.
Mm.
That would be an example.
Yeah, or I've had Randy Frost always often talk to people about the belief paper here in Living Systems around, how do you want to show up as a parent? How do you want to show up as a spouse? How do you want to show up as a friend? Like those like how to think through those relationship pieces. And to me, I think that what I appreciate what you said, Anne, is when I've done belief papers, what's been useful to me is thinking about it out, in my own little head and space, and then watching the other side of that, like what shows up in the relationship. So I think this is the way I want to function as a parent, for instance, but what is the actual evidence that of what I'm doing when I'm in that relationship? Because sometimes, I think that's when I said, when, sometimes I don't know what I don't know, or I don't know what I don't see until there's a little bit of tension. And then it's like, oh, I sure thought I would do that. But man, when it got to the moment, I showed up differently. And that's, I can be real critical on some days, but some days that's just really interesting, useful information.
And I think so then you put theory into this, and I mean, one of the questions is, in what way is Bowen theory useful in your life? And you could say there's a little belief in that, that there's no proof, but these concepts, I mean, one is the example is the concept of the triangle. How does one manage oneself in the triangle? Well, is your belief that if you could stay out of the problem of two other people, that they will resolve it, you might operate differently. than if you
Hmm.
think I need to get in the middle of this and try to be a peacemaker. And those would be examples. I mean, the other big example, I think, is over under functioning in the family. And I think a lot of parents relate to that. I need to help my child. My child is having a drug problem, but what I need to do is to help them, because otherwise something horrible could happen and they could wreck their life. So let me do what I can do to manage this. Well, that's a very understandable protective mechanism of parents.
Yeah.
But if you have the belief that if you take on the responsibilities of a young adult or an adult, they won't. If you have that belief, which I think is part of theory, then you may operate differently. But that's where I think the theory, the hypotheses in the theory are important in how people develop how they believe they need to operate in a family.
Yeah. I was appreciating what you said about solid and pseudo self, because I was asked to talk about it earlier in this year. So I took a big dive and I kind of had a better understanding for myself, I think, around what Bowen was communicating. I was glad to see that quote, because I think one of the things I don't want to communicate in this episode that one is good or bad. I think the thing I appreciate about Bowen Theory is this helps me to understand my functioning and other people's functionings within a system. So when a person has a strongly held belief, but they're in a context which it doesn't feel safe, maybe, to express that belief, I think to think about that in a way, theory would really help me think through that in a way that's useful to me to, manage my own getting critical with self or other around these processes. I mean, we are definitely in times where some beliefs are being actively threatened with violence, and that's a real challenge.
Well, another example, if I could keep going here, is a lot of my interest over time, I've written about this, is what in Bowen theory is called bridging cutoff. And I think there's this idea that if somebody in your family is upsetting you, like your mother, then one way to handle that is to distance, or not talk to her. And in Bowen theory, a premise is, I don't know if I should say lean in, but if you can engage with your mother and manage yourself, but that's a belief you have to accept.
Yeah.
And when you incorporate that belief, I think it makes a difference in one's level of maturity, which then I think affects your beliefs.
And what do you think goes into a person putting some conviction behind that? I mean, I appreciate what you're saying here, like that there would have to be something in the person to say it's worth it for me to do these hard things. What do you watch with your years of practice? Kind of what goes into a person getting some conviction behind that belief?
Well, to me, I think it's the process of differentiation. Bowen had this idea that in all of us, in everybody, there is a kernel of individuality. I don't know if you've covered that in your sessions, but it would be that a person is able to emerge in a more thoughtful, kind of ethically driven direction in one's life if one can face the emotionality that's getting in one's way. That's to me what's interesting. I mean, are you interested in navigating your mother and learning something about yourself versus not talking to her? And some people will say, no, I'm not, I'm not really interested.
Yeah.
But I think they miss something, because if they could stop reacting to their mother, they probably would do better in life in general. That's the premise of Bowen Theory, that if you can get into what he would say the triangles, but the relationships that are difficult for you to manage, then you will be more confident about yourself.
Yeah, and I think that is so useful of long-time clinical practice. I was just sitting with a new family recently and did their family diagram, and I was just observing how much cutoff there is in this extended system, and just thinking about that theory would give me a way to think about the challenges that these three people are sitting in this room will have something to do with that. that challenge that they have of figuring out how to stay connected through challenge, or figure out how to regulate themselves in the face of that. And I think that was, I put that thinking into that system is, this is just something you're up against. I would, the way I think about this in theory, this is just one thing you might be up against in this system. And what do you want to do with that?
Yeah, I think that's the way that Bowen Theory challenges your beliefs. They're just not a given. They're open to learning.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think I can run 5 miles. Well, maybe you can't, but maybe you can. So why don't you, are you interested in finding out? That kind of thing. And I don't think my child will survive if I don't help him or her. But you won't know unless you allow that child more agency.
Yeah.
So those are the things people face that challenge their beliefs. Like, my belief is he can't do it.
Yeah, and the relationship pressure that goes into that in a system. I think that's pretty, I think that's one of the things that I have found. Lois Walker will often talk about respecting the emotional process in the system, and just being aware of what can go into people choosing to do or not do something. That I think beliefs would fit into that, like a shift in a belief in a family. In my family, maybe that's less of a big thing to shift a belief or to shift a way of functioning in relationship. But in another family, I think it can be really threatening to the system.
Well, that's what I think. That's what I think Bowen was was addressing, in terms of, that if you believe something and you're trying to operate differently in a family, that the family will push back, will tell you you're wrong.
Yeah.
Which he, I think, would call the togetherness force, or the oneness in a family. So that part of separating from a family as an individual, while not disconnecting from the family, is this effort to define oneself through one's beliefs. Now, part of what I did when I was young is I did it in a reactive way. And that's what I think has changed over time, that my father was for the Vietnam War and I was against the Vietnam War. Now, I don't think it was wrong to be against the Vietnam War, but I think the way I did it was a reactive stance.
Yeah. Well, and is it fair to say that certain topics in a family will, sort of are the untouchable topics because they up that anxiety? Or would those families just have struggle or be on the verge of, I don't know, I'm not being very clear here, but because it's a content question, right? If we're talking about something mild, something easy, we can maybe keep contact. But if it gets to, politics or religion, I guess in my mind, that ups the anxiety, which will lead to more conflict or more intensity. So the content does matter a little bit, or it's just sort of lurking under the surface of the processes?
Well, I think one of the things I look for in families is how much the generations define themselves by what has been an important belief in the family. And they can define themselves by accepting that belief. I mean, I think two big ones are politics and religion.
Mm-hmm.
So in my husband's family, they came from a traditionally conservative religious background. And for 5 generations, there was a serious believer, and then a non-serious believer, and then then that son was a serious believer. Then there was a non-serious believer. And how much do those belief systems, how much are they an effort for the individual to define him or herself in the family by being different?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you say, well, I believe this religion is right for me, which I don't argue with that. But how much is that the opposite than what your father or your mother thought?
Mm-hmm.
And then how much do your children take an opposite point of view? And how much is that so that's where I think what we're trying to put our finger on is that emotionality can play a big factor in beliefs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my father was conservative politically. I'm not so conservative. And my son, man, he could just do great with his grandfather. They have a lot in common. So, but I think I do a better job in relating to my son and his beliefs than I think I did with my father. That's where I would say, that things change over time in terms of how do you understand something versus get all worked up about it.
And that also made me think about the resource of that every other generation thing. I've heard so many instances about, this is just coming into my brain right now, so I haven't thought a lot about this, but how interesting to think about that flip flop that you see so often, where the grandparent and the grandchild generation will have similar beliefs that are different from the middle generation. Like, is there something in the system, in the emotional system, that is a way of connecting generations, I suppose, at some level? If they're thinking similarly to the previous generation, it might create some heat in that parent-child generation, but it would offer potentially some connection to the previous generation. I don't know. That's just popped in my mind where you were telling that story. I was thinking about that.
I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of reactivity. Back when I used to see families with alcoholism, it's not so much a belief system, because generally people who come from families with alcoholism don't believe in alcoholism.
Yeah.
This is one of their core beliefs. However, you get this where one generation had a severe alcohol problem and the next abstained.
Yeah.
Then the next one drank, and when they drank to excess. And then, so it just go down.
So maybe it can function useful and less useful.
I think the emotional process has a lot to do with how we come to our beliefs. And I think if one is trying to work on differentiation and is defining oneself in the emotional process, like how you operate, not necessarily what you believe, that's where I think your beliefs can change to a more mature level of belief. But, there's no scientific research.
Well, and I just appreciate, but it is, I think I did a little AI lit search on thinking about what does the sciences say about beliefs. And I think there are a lot of ways where what science does say is useful for me to think about how Bowen theory could contribute to that, like confirmation bias. Like, once we have a belief, it's really hard to not look for evidence to support that belief. And other areas of science where the emotional, there's one group that will say this is an all cognitive process, and then Antonio Damasio would add the part of that this is the way our beliefs are formed is an emotional process as well. It uses different systems, and I think those are things that when I'm sitting with a family in my office, or when I'm sitting thinking about this myself, like using the ideas of Bowen theory on getting clear, recognizing that there's a togetherness and individuality piece here, that science is useful to me as well, to think about what evidence would say, I guess, an individual is up against when they begin to think about shifting a belief, for example.
I had the chance to do 2 workshops on beliefs in about the past 6 weeks here, to lead them from a theory perspective. And the image that was sort of on the, that title screen was kids in a tug of war. And it's the idea of the push and pull of relationships in beliefs. And it can be really easy for me to observe in my life, sort of like I said about the bravado and the bottling up when I manage differences by being quiet or getting really in your face. And so has been helpful for me to think about that push and pull, and to just observe, what are those relationships? Who are those people? Where is the push or pull stronger? What does that look like across time? What does that look like across the generations? And I went back to when we had Monica McGoldrick on the podcast last year, and she said, just think broader. What would your great-grandfather say about this thing you're facing? What would you want your granddaughter, who hasn't been born yet, to know you're thinking of the situation? And it really shifted for me the idea of, I get pushed and pulled by these relationships, and I don't know what I think, and I don't have the courage, or I turn into a jackass when I finally speak up. Like, seeing it, the relationship context is negative, and more of like, this is the stuff of life. All beliefs will exist in a context, and just allowed me to sort of observe, like you say, Katie, what people are up against in their relationships and across time. And that's what I love about this Robert Williamson, his articles, is he creates a chart that says, this was my belief, this was the time that it changed, and the anxiety or the stressors in the relationship, what was the level of anxiety, just as a way to sort of observe instead of, I'm a good reactor. But that image of the tug of war, it really shifted when I started seeing it up and down the generations with McGoldrick.
Yeah.
Well, I just think, how does one get perspective? How does one see what the other person is up against, where they come from? Even politically, how are these people who want to attack the Capitol, which is a really big issue here? What are they facing that fuels this emotion? But I think that's true in a family too. And I think looking up the generations is a wonderful way to try to get that perspective.
Yeah. And I think the other part of that I put in sort of probably my takeaway is, I think that one side of this is thinking through what are my own beliefs, but the other discipline reminder for me is to get curious with other people in my system and my life about their beliefs and where they come from and how they're thinking about them. And, I think watching, I guess, Dixie, like my reactivity to try and shift or change the other instead of just sitting and just being really interested in what they're thinking about and where it came from. And I think that's the relationship piece. And what do I learn about myself in that process of getting curious about others' beliefs? Maybe I will get new information, or maybe I will just get clearer about how I think about some things and what goes into that process. So I think that's the other part that I was thinking about today, is just my effort to get curious also about what other people are thinking about.
The movie example I thought of was Little Women And when you think about that story, it is those 4 girls who each kind of have a different definition of the adult life that they want. And Joe has some opinions on what each of them should do. And so it was just, I hadn't maybe thought of it in terms of beliefs, but each of those 4 girls will have their definition, and they pursued them. Joe, maybe the most reactive, I'm not sure.
I laughed because I was like, and Joe's the author, so she gets to tell the story of of what her thinking is about these people's beliefs and how they live their life.
Yeah.
And I always think about that, the usefulness in my own family system when I connect with different parts of the system, and just, just the different perspectives that people can tell about the same incidents, like the same event in a family. I just had lunch with my aunt a little while ago, and I thought, man, that's a very different way than my father told that story. And just that's interesting. I think that's interesting to think about how each person kind of observes the system from a different lens or a different experience. I don't know what that has to do with beliefs, but that's what I thought about when you were talking about Little Women.
I think they would each say they have a belief.
Yeah.
And how much, I think part of what I've learned to respect is how much what we believe. So this is Robert Sapolsky, who says it's all determined, but how much what we believe is intertwined with the emotional process in our family, which includes our sibling position, the marriage of our parents, and many other factors, the level of anxiety in the family. And, there's a lot of factors that each of us have been impacted by. And, how much, one of my big things is what's fair. It's a big thing for me. What's fair? What's fair in life? What's fair in society? And guess what? I'm a middle.
Right.
So, it's like, wait a minute, what? I don't want her to talk more than me. Or what about this? What about in my book club? What about this woman over here? She hasn't said anything. We gotta go. We gotta let her talk. So it's, I have to step on it sometimes.
We could do a whole episode on fairness. I love how much fairness comes up in family therapy. I always joke that I had a Girl Scout leader in grade 2 that said to me, Katie, I don't know who in life told you it's fair, but it is not fair. You just need to learn it right now. For this lady when I was 8 years old. She must have been she must have been a middle.
Right.
Well, are we to the takeaway part? And did you have any other examples or thinking that you wanted to put in here?
No, I just think in Bowen Theory, part of what happens in one's belief system is thinking about one's position in one's family and what one wants to do about it. Whether you don't like your mother or whether you think your mother's the best thing since sliced bread, all of those things are mediated by the emotional process. And so in some ways, when we're thinking about our beliefs, I think we're thinking about our position in the family, what we have absorbed over generations. And those are the things that I think as one works to be more clear about how one wants to operate in the family, one has more capacity to figure out what one really believes about what you want to do in the family, but just in general. What are you afraid of? And a lot of times I think that's fueling a lot of emotion now in society, is fear. Yeah. So I think the more one works on differentiation and is more confident that what one stands for is something one can defend or be clear about, I think that gives more room to to figure out what do you really believe. So it's complicated.
I found a cartoon just yesterday, and I'll try to put it up on the screen here. And it's a boxing ring, and the guy, the announcer, and then this sort of old dude standing in the corner. And the announcer says, "In this corner, still undefeated, Frank's long-held beliefs." And I'm like, and I think you started the episode with this, Anne. It's like, how do you know the difference between someone who is just they will stick with their values versus you are stuck?
Yeah.
What is that subtle difference from you are so closed-minded to look at how I don't know the words, but there's a nuance there. Pardon?
Who gets to decide?
Decides? Yeah. And what was helpful for Frank?
Came back to that useful Bowen quote that I heard about what does it take people to get interested in themselves? Like, who gets in? Who decides to get interested in? What do I think about this? How do I how do I interact with the world? My takeaway was for myself around belief systems, which is slow down. Like, the effort it takes to really step back and think about things. Think about what do I think here? What do I believe here? What am I willing to do? What am I not willing to do? I think that we exist in a world where there is not a lot of time created to just slow down and think about that. And the other thing I think, which we did not get to, is we exist in a world where we readily have access to other people telling us what to think and believe about something in a very quick and loud, seductive, sophisticated way.
Well, I'll sort of end this by referring to something Dr. Bowen wrote. It's called the epilogue. And one of my favorite parts of that, it's in the family evaluation book with Michael Kerr and Emerita Bowen. And he's talking about the definition of a family leader. And part of it is that the family leader has a clear definition of their beliefs and a respect for the beliefs of others. And I really like that. There's additional things, but he never, anywhere else that I know of, defined differentiation in sort of very concrete terms. But in that section, he talks about what he thinks a mature person looks like.
What a great end to a season on exploring different beliefs. I think that little quote is a really lovely, way to kind of draw it together. Because I think that's what we've been talking about all season is, these hot topics are hard for some families to talk about. And how do you engage in that? Thanks, Anne.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's just been fun to talk to you all.
Yes, you too.
Yeah.
All right, I have a few just reminders that I want to throw out there before we end, which is if you would like to support the efforts of this podcast behind the scenes, we put a link to our coffee site where you can contribute to the efforts that we make. We appreciate your support. If you would like to learn more about Bowen Theory, it is time of the year when all program registration is open. So please check out the offerings we have at Living Systems right now. I know the Bowen Center also has opened up its offerings. Anne, are you running your course again next year?
Yes, I lead the clinical study seminar, which is for clinicians who have some training in Bowen Theory who want to present cases and discuss them.
Great. So please check out Anne's course. Also, I want to put a plug in for our fall conference, which we've just have launched. You can register on our website, which is about thinking big about family challenges. And our keynote is Carrie Collier, who has been a guest on our podcast. Also, I know the Bowen Center is also advertising its 63rd annual symposium in the fall. This year, it will be featuring Scott Gilbert, who studies the holobiont, and abstracts are open for that, as well as my final plug. I'm always going to, probably from now till next July, put in a plug for the International Conference, which is happening in July 2027. We have abstracts out. So please, if you're interested in sharing your thinking, there's lots of opportunities to do so, or just join us and have great conversations. So that is my plugs for the day.
Good. And I want to thank everyone who's decided to stay on the elevator with us for another season. Katie and I will be back in the fall with more Bowen Theory. And in the meantime, I hope people keep working on these ideas and your own beliefs as you go out into your relationships. This podcast is produced by Living Systems, a nonprofit organization in Vancouver offering counseling and training programs in Bowen family systems theory across Canada.